In this second video from War, Art and Visual Culture Los Angeles, Max Presneill, the director and curator at Torrance Art Museum and co-curator for the Generation War exhibition, chairs a session with two artists and a special guest. The first artist is Allison Stewart, who produced a series of pictures of bug-out bags and their contents, which were included in Generation War. The second is the Australian former official war artist Shaun Gladwell, who produced a VR work called AR-15 Field Strip that was also included in the exhibition. Now, both of those works by Stewart and Gladwell included our third panellist, who is Max Moore. Now, Max Moore is a Special Forces soldier who has a particular kind of interest in art, but also within the politics of war. So I hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time.
So I won't bother with this. My name is Max Presneill. I'm the director and curator at the museum. I curate this show with Ichiro, who will be talking on a panel this afternoon about the show with Kit. We were asked to whether we'd be interested in hosting the symposium, and it's a perfect fit for what this particular show is about. If you're unaware, the museum tends towards working with emerging artists, lots of international shows, but we're particularly interested in including political shows in our programming. So that's a regular thing, comes up once, twice a year for us at the museum. So what we're going to do for this particular panel is we have two artists that are in the show and one person who is in the show through the images. So Allison Stewart is the photographer with those two works and the bug-out bags over here. Shaun Gladwell is an Australian video and artist who has done the VR here. And Max Moore is recently ex-military, whose bug-out bag is over there, and is the person in the VR who's taking apart the rifle. I guess the common link between all of us is through us knowing each other socially for many, many years now. And so we're going to have a kind of informal discussion. We're going to start very, very loosely. If you have questions as we're going along, jump in with them. I'm sure nobody here is going to be worried about being offended by any questions. Anyway, so I shall begin with a quick question, which it sounds ridiculous if you ask me, but I think it's relevant. So, thinking about what this exhibition is and about, because it doesn't focus directly on warfare, a question came up, which is how, if we're going to talk about warfare, if we're going to talk about things that happen at home and in the boundaries of what warfare might be, what do we mean when we say war, when the word is being thrown around in social contexts in ways that it wasn't perhaps before, when we thought we knew what war was? We have culture wars and we have other things like this. What are we seeing, particularly in your own works or in your own histories? What is a fuller extension of what we might be talking about when we consider the term itself? What is this?
Well, the term war, and when you think about it in military and political terms, then it's a very specific set of circumstances. And but I mean, the United States has not formally declared war since prior to Vietnam, so we don't do that anymore. It's like armed conflict or police actions. So it is society. It is us who are using the term and adopting the term when we're talking about these conflicts. But in the social sense, in the personal sense, I think that war is a state of being where you are able to deny another human being their humanity. War is the act of othering and destroying. So whether that's on a physical sense or if it's on an ideological sense, it's this creation of an enemy and the destruction of that.
Is this loud enough? Yeah? Okay.
Go ahead.
All right.
Look, I'm going to start off by saying it's such a problematic term for me, and I don't have any authority over this concept. So I'm going to speak unqualified, personally, about this thing, war. I've got no idea. I mean, I guess when someone says that there's a cyber attack going on, or that there's cyber warfare taking place, I have to believe them because someone's data is being compromised, and there's a group or an individual out there that's hacking away, and that's interesting for me. In terms of using war, like there's two groups at each other in some symmetrical or asymmetrical fashion trying to get each other's data. I don't know, this has happened before, where maybe the word or the term war is appropriate, but I just know that there's people's personal experience of war, and that is largely ineffable, I think. For me, it's very difficult to try and explain the experience of war, and then it's further problematic to try and work out where war may sort of begin or end. Do you know what I mean?
As somebody that was the Australian war artist yourself,
he was embedded.
Yeah.
So tell them that. So that.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, maybe I should mention that I have a kind of an experience of being in an active war zone for a little while. Nowhere near as long as the guy sitting next to me, but it was an experience that where there was different layers of being involved in a war. There was like the Middle East area of operations, which is like all of the support bases that were in the Middle East, they're in the UAE, like in Al Minhad or in Kuwait, and you're in war as soon as you're deployed overseas. Yeah, like you're kind of representing your country, or in this case ISAF, and then as you go into those staging bases, you start to go further up the river or downrange. Well, there's lots of different terms.
Yeah.
And that gets you to the theatre, which is the active war zone, and that's when you're in the two-way firing range, and that's where I think the term is more real than ever, because it's an active war zone. But I don't want to speak too much because you have got
I think that
more experience, man.
So I don't know. Somebody wants to define war as like the violent ends of political discourse or whatever. And I think that what you all are saying is true, but I also think there's sort of more to it. I think that one of the things that really sort of comforted me in my discomfort was recognizing that I'm just another warrior in like an endless legacy of people who've been fighting, and like those Apaches and those Roman centurions and those Zulus all had the same fucking stone stuck in their boot. They all had to bear the spear and the banner of their empire. And I think that it's really easy to get sort of impressed by the imagery and the stuff, right? Fucking Black Hawk helicopters on night vision goggles, it's fucking amazing, right? The Jolly Green Giant. But I don't think that enough is spoken to the love that is inherent in war. Like, politicians will manipulate you into believing that like if you don't go do this, then like your people will suffer. And you love your people, and so you go. And you have this bonding experience, which maybe you felt when you're embedded with these other dudes, mostly dudes. When you're embedded with these other dudes, and you come to like a kind of bonding and brotherhood that's much deeper than family. When you have to, even just to get there, you have to outperform 80% of the dudes who showed up. And you're doing it and you're pushing yourself because of love. And because it's a manipulation of your hate, you know what I mean, when you're a young person. It's a manipulation of your fear, but like it's mostly a manipulation of your love, And I think that I think that's the thing that, from my personal experience, I went to war 6 times. I was an intelligence specialist for a while, doing mission planning as a think tank soldier my first 2 times, And then my last 4 times I went as a special operations combat medic, we call it corpsman. And you know, there's some Bible passage that talks about like, there's no greater love than when you would lay down your life for your brother, you know? And I think that like it's really easy to listen to some hateful orange-colored fucking hawk who like will manipulate all your hate and manipulate all your you know, your negativity, and that motherfucker heals for too bad for him to actually go to war. And I said,
a further question, which is, when is a war okay?
I mean, it's always okay. It's just, you know, but it's just only okay. It's not as great as like just loving each other and getting over your fucking fears and figuring out a better way to turn a dollar.
Sean, did your experiences there change any kind of ways of thinking about what was an acceptable, when war was acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about acceptable as a term. I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that, but I guess the idea of supporting a war is a tough one, because I think what Max was saying is interesting, is that maybe it doesn't in the end become about supporting a state. It becomes supporting who you have to work with in a team or a group, because they're going to make the ultimate sacrifice if it has to be them for you and you for them, and that is a wild connection. Like that is electrifying as an organisation, and I was only able to see a little bit of that. But then I guess my father's experience of Vietnam, he was in Vietnam for 2 tours with American forces, but with Australian and New Zealand forces in southern Vietnam, and he has told me quite a lot about this experience as well, being of supporting not the war but the situation, either in order to achieve an objective or just to survive. And so support starts to kind of, it's all about life support, but then there's a kind of maybe a disconnection to the bigger politics, because like maybe the bigger politics of why the war's taking place sometimes is well, it's not for me. I can't say for anyone else's experience but mine, that my experience in southern Afghanistan was no one really cared about what was happening with the Karzai government in Afghanistan, because that was the north, and Kabul was the city, and the south was about tribal warfare, and it was a completely different war. It was almost like there was several wars going on within the same umbrella as what we call Afghanistan, the Afghanistan campaign.
So for a lot of your photographs, some of these war monuments being taken down or still there, and in some sense, I guess that for a lot of people, particularly in the south, is still an ongoing war in some sense. Did you? What did you find in going to take the photographs and speaking to people as you do about how they see this as a possible war?
How they see the discussion of the monuments as a possible war? Yeah, you know, there's a lot of people that are like, well, those boys died too, and they are Americans, and we should honor them because of that. When we talk about the support of the war, but we rarely talk about support of the war. We talk about support of the troops. And so we talk about support our troops, and so we're really talking about our boys. You know, we're talking about our young men and the boys that fight. And so in the South, then they are looking at these monuments as being, you know, dedicated to these young men's lives. But and so then they talk about, well, it's the history, this is our history, but in actuality, the history of Confederate monuments is really the history of the KKK and the United Daughters of the Confederacy. It was a very systematic propaganda machine that they created at the beginning of the 20th century to create the lost cause that we're dealing with, and they took over, you know, they wrote textbooks, they were on school boards, they probably still are on school boards. I would love to know how many United Daughters of the Confederacy members are still on school boards across the South. And they controlled the narrative. And so there is this idea of us in that when I was in Georgia, the Sons of the Confederacy wear patches on their jackets that say occupied Georgia. And this is during Obama's administration. So they're still seeing that, and I have a great aunt who I visited in Georgia because I have family from that area and from that time. And she's like, oh, well, this is just a pause in the fighting, between fighting seasons. This war isn't over yet. So a lot of them have not, we're in a cold civil war. They recognize that as a cold civil war and movement towards, will there be movement towards an actual physical civil war again?
Well, I'm going to go slightly off topic now for my questions because of that, because I think it's interesting that your other photographs of prepper bags, although I'm actually amusing when we see these four together, and I know one of them was Max's bag, but they seem to reflect a lot about the individual, a lot about the individual's ideas of survival, but they also seem to reflect a degree of paranoia about the culture and the idea of the other, about the invasion, about the kind of fear and insecurity. And so I wanted to kind of move off topic very quickly to asking you how you feel that the idea of prepper bags fits into an idea of warfare, about it being the gap between something happening.
Right. Well, my work over the past decade has really been looking at the archetype of the hero. And so the prepper's the hero. The prepper's the one that is prepared, and they're the ones that are going to survive. And just like they take a lot from soldiers, you know. And the go bag, the bug out bag, came from the Korean War. And so this, throughout the Obama administration, most of my work, that project I stopped making them right after the election. So the project goes from 2014 to 2016. And so at that time, you know, a lot of the discussion was like, Obama's going to come and take my guns away and all that. And it's the fear, and he was talking about our current president of, you know, that these ideas have always been there, and that fear and that othering has always been there, but he's just weaponized it. And there was kind of a weaponization of that fear. And so I think that's what the Bug Out Bag project speaks to.
How about you, Max? Because that's actually your bag.
That's my bag. Mine's the one with the 2 pistols and the 2 large knives at the top.
Best bag.
Two hands, 2 guns, right?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, what do you think that this bag reflects about your knowledge and looking at the other bags?
Well, so one of the things that I take issue with the way that you sort of started that question is you said, you know, it speaks to the paranoia. I don't think there's anything paranoid at all about being prepared. You know what I mean? I think that like shit happens and that people will just, when shit happens, people will just shred the social contract and they'll just take what the fuck they want. There are psychopaths living amongst us. They'll just die. And all they need is a good fucking excuse. That's it. And we elected one, for fuck's sake, right? And so, like, you know, I think that, you know, I don't feel like I'm paranoid. In fact, I think I'm a bit underprepared. So yeah, I think that like, I think the go bag is the ability to stay mobile and to defend yourself for 72 hours, right? Until, and so like, I've been trained that you use a knife to get to a pistol and you use a pistol to get to a rifle. So, like, I mean, that violence exists in the world. And I just believe that as long as that's true, the best thing that you can do is to master that violence. You know, I think that a lot of people will self-identify as like pacifists. I'm a pacifist. And I'll tell you that if you don't actually know how to fight, you're not a pacifist. You're a victim who's just had a really long lucky streak. If you can't actually fight back, right, then you should learn how to. Because people will victimize you. And that's an unfortunate reality of life. And not being able to fight back isn't the same thing as choosing not to. You're just making sour grapes. Yes? Right. And so, I believe that, my victimized homosexual and LGBT friends should go buy a fucking pistol and learn how to use it. I think that, it's your responsibility as an advanced fucking chimp to learn how to use all the tools that there are. And that includes the tools that keep you out of, being victimized by other advanced chimps.
But don't you see as a victim of the system when you went to war?
I never would consider myself a victim.
Do you volunteer?
There's only a volunteer force.
And did you ever think of the victims, of the people that were sitting in their country? And here you come with the sponsorship of a repressive, most violent country. There's severely sponsored to go there.
Hold on,
let me finish.
Please.
And victimize people that have no reason to be killed.
Yeah. So,
because you talk about love and camaraderie, but did you ever think of the people that were the ultimate victims of what you were doing?
I'm so glad you brought this up. I have a greater love for those other soldiers than I have for most people in this room. I have a greater love for my enemy and what he has in common with me, and because of what he has in common with me, than I have for most of you all. And I love you all too. And I think that it is not me who gets to decide policy. It is me who carries it out.
And you were an instrument.
We are all instruments. We all have the power to vote. We all have the power to protest. All this that you're saying is absolutely true. But collectively, we didn't go firebomb the fucking White House either, right? We sat passively and let guys like me go do the bidding that corrupted leaders call for, that you all didn't stop. So don't look at the instrument, look at the people who created the instrument.
No,
I'm just the Frankenstein. You guys are Dr. Frankenstein.
No, but in order to make that statement on your part, you should know, where he stands, she stands, I stand, and you don't know.
I stand.
Right?
I stand.
You cannot make that argument because you don't know people. And I'll tell you, in this country, I'm from Mexico, but in this country there is a very progressive pacifist, although you don't want to call them pacifists, movement that oppose, but there is no democracy in this country where you can elect people that truly commit to change, right? So if you fight with the tools the system allows you to fight with, it is very limited the stuff you can do, right? You cannot take arms and let them become as violent as the government. So what options do you have? You go march on the streets, you vote as limited value you vote may have, but there's very limited stuff you can do. What you can do is refuse. When the government says go there, you can refuse to say no.
Sure.
This is immoral, this is not humane, I will not do it. And yet, a lot of us go. And they're calling us heroes, when in fact we're victims of the system and we're assassins because we kill people that have no reason to be killed.
I think that.
And then we come back home and we send all kinds of justifications to cover up, to pretend we are the good guys, when in fact it's the opposite.
So I've been living in Mexico for the last year, and my last job was actually, before I left, was actually working for special operations in Mexico, teaching the local Mexican military how to fight back against the cartels. Every power system is complicit in violence. They just are. I would wish it wasn't that way. I would wish that like we don't have this sort of innate human sacrifice thing that we've been doing, but humans do that. They've sacrificed the Aztecs and to the sun god. We just do that. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with us, but we do that. I think we've got a problem with the ego centers in our brain. I think that's what it really is. But I wanted to talk about.
Let's go back to the question.
Yeah, I had a question. I don't know if you know this, if there's any research being done, if there are any statistics on how many people have that sort of prep gear in a sort of stowed away. And also you mentioned that you did research during Obama's presidency, and then you stopped for different reasons. And I'd be curious whether they increased or decreased after Trump was elected.
I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I think that there are more people that are prepared for some sort of emergency, whether it's government or it's earthquake. But there's more people that are prepared and who have go bags today than there are people who don't.
Right.
But California's a very different situation with that because it's an earthquake zone. And it is like, as I work, I'm here at the museum, but we're a municipal museum where the local government has sent out instructions that we should have emergency bags ready in case of earthquake, because if there is one, we are expected to go out as workers for the government to engage in whatever problems might come up.
So you get a list of what's in the emergency bag?
I'm actually the person responsible for putting together the list for the bug out bags for the Cultural Affairs Division. So
are guns on that list? Are guns on that list?
They're not. But there are...
Are they strongly suggested?
They're not. There are types of knives that are useful that are on the list, and there are things like pepper spray that can be on that list, but mostly it's things to do with safety, first aid kit, water, things to make sure that people can drink water, like there's straws, special straws, etc., etc.
Because that sounds more like a survival kit. This sounds more like a defense/attack kit.
Well, no, that's because if you actually look at those, one of the bags, which I think is hilarious, is actually nearly everything in it is to keep their pet alive, without thinking through the ramifications that if they don't survive, it's kind of irrelevant on how the cat might get on.
Right.
And the other end here, we have a Harley Davidson bag with weed and I think vodka.
Phenobarbital and tequila.
Yeah. So I mean, look, their idea is get high. Okay,
great.
Yeah.
He's like, you guys deal with the apocalypse. I'm going to find a nice tree. I'm 72. I'm done. You know.
Yeah. Because I mean, the reason why I'm curious, that is a very uniquely US phenomenon, the survival kit.
It is.
Like that is. If you go to many other places around the world which have experienced profound and prolonged periods of crisis and war and ongoing war and never-ending war, it just doesn't happen. Like, you just don't do that. And if you ask people, like,
but it
doesn't register.
Well, I did use the word paranoia earlier because I do think that the psyche of the country is in a constant state of paranoia. If I have to hear again that our troops were defending us from Afghanistan. I've never seen an Afghan soldier, and I've never been to the beach waiting for them to land, and I don't know anybody that goes to the beach to prepare for their landing, or planes coming over with Chinese dropping out stormtroopers. But the part of the bug out scenario, I think a lot of people in California have it because it's just survival. But there is because I had to do research for the prepping, and we did a prepper show here a couple of years ago. There is a vast amount of paranoia with it because there's always the danger of invasion of the other. These recent shootings were all talking about invasions. Mexicans, whoever else is invading. That state, in some ways, is pronounced in American culture, in one way or another. I mean, you can look at movies. How much of that is defending against the invasion of somebody? House invasions by drug dealers. It's always this thing where you need to be ready because you are the next victim And American society is a society of victimhood to some degree. Everybody is waiting to be, and even for young people, there's still a lot of arguments about, I'm more of a victim than you are. I mean, when that changes from that self-reliant, or the American mystique of the self-reliance of the individual, to one of constantly searching for how I can be more victim than you, then why would there be any surprise that things like bug-out bags proliferate everywhere?
The other thing, it was just that particular bag. Max, you said 72 hours it's intended to. Is that like a standard?
Yeah, there's time bags.
Anything more in like between the water and the bullets and the batteries, you would be overloaded and you wouldn't be able to eat the calories to hold that, to run with that weight.
Because what fascinates me there is that at some sort of subconscious level that there's like a belief that after 72 hours something will be restored.
Yeah.
So even though the starting position is everything will fall apart, but if you hold on, it will come back. So there's like an underlying belief in the state.
Or you can travel for 3 days away from whatever that problem is. Right? I mean, in 72 hours you could be in Guadalajara on a bus.
Yeah. Why that fascinates me is if you transport that into a region that's been like completely destroyed for 20 years, like that makes no sense. Like you can't make it back for 20 years because there's no government, there's no infrastructure, there is nothing. So I like the time delay. It's almost like there's like a belief like it will be okay in the end if we just push through.
I was thinking of I was thinking of my experiences of preparation. I guess with Max's, it's like you're professionally preparing, like as opposed to like just checking out with the drinks. And
this is walking dead. Yeah.
This is like I mean, but I was thinking that like when I was in southern Afghanistan, I was in different bases. Like there was like larger bases that had 40,000 people, like in Kuwait, like the LSA, which was like a revolving door between troops coming in from different countries from ISAF. To active theatres of war at that stage, which was Iraq and Afghanistan in 2009. And so there's 40,000 people. And then they're getting prepared to go to other smaller bases within those theatres. And then those bases are then connected to these things called FOBs, forward operating bases. And at a forward operating base, you would see backpacks, packs, equipment constantly being checked, constantly being cleaned, the equipment being field stripped. Because there will be a group in one of those forward operating bases, like a special operations task group, and they're going to be ready to go. They're going to get a call, and they're going to be out and in a really dangerous situation. SOTG, like special forces or special operations task groups, will be in the worst place. They'll be the first in the worst place.
Like a helicopter crash and you get shot down.
They'll be there.
And you're packing to keep yourself alive for 72 hours and hold or get the fuck away from there with your pilot and his data, right? Crypto data, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is like you have instructors who teach you, and they've lost dudes because somebody just slept through cleaning their rifle that time, or they just didn't do what the fuck, and my kingdom for a horse, that kind of situation, right? And so like, I also think there's this sort of like, there's like this OCD like survival part of your brain that rewards you. You know when you get like a paycheck, right? Your check comes in and there's like, it's not just the money, you're like, I got groceries, like, it's gonna be okay, right? Like you have no idea like how much more ecstatic it is when you're like, my fucking blades are sharp, my fucking gun is oiled, and I'm going to make it as difficult as possible for the person playing this game against me to fucking kill me. And I'm going to be like, that's a whole other kind of fucking OCD paycheck. Like, there's a survival center in your little monkey brain that like, when you have your shit together, is incredibly pleased, you know? And especially when there's some other monkey out there who wants to fucking kill you.
And I think that, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that as a military mindset, I mean, that would be something that you would expect to be kind of part of the training. But there's a difference between that and that kind of weaponization sort of permeating the public sphere and just kind of becoming the zeitgeist mindset. And sort of to go back to your question, which is like, what are we talking about for war? I think there's a distinction between that version of the war, where it's like weaponization of the public sphere, versus what people call negative peace, which is like absence of peace, where everything looks like the war, except there's no direct kind of shooting. And I think the former is very much like what I'm seeing and hearing about the United States, like that sort of weaponization on dialed up to 11. Sure.
Well, I guess in Australia we wouldn't be able to have the handguns unless they were registered, yeah? Straight up.
No, exactly. Yeah. Nor would you. I mean, that's...
Yeah, well, no, I think there'd be like, there's like service professionals and emergency professionals in Australia that have bags ready to go, but it's just that you wouldn't need that for a camping exercise, or, civic life wouldn't require 2 handguns. But then I was thinking it's interesting to see a professionally packed bag for a situation that could be from 0 to 10 in terms of, in terms of military bases, there's like a code system, like a safe base Bravo as opposed to Charlie and Delta or whatever. And so the bags will change according to the security level. So like a safe base Bravo bag is going to look like the pot and the whiskey rather than Delta, which is like you have...
Yeah.
So it's almost like there's a structure in place for the prep bags within a military sense, but then, like I guess in civic life, you would hope that you would never need the handguns. I guess.
I should say like my idea is to be able to move through a chaotic space and actually help people. My idea is to be able to move forward and like take care of broken legs and take care of lacerations and take care of people who are being, fucked with. And like, I can't do that if I'm not confident that like, you can't victimize me first, right? And so it's not like, fucking just kill everybody. It's more like, you are not going to fuck with me, and you are not going to fuck with these people who cannot help themselves. There are weaker people who will be taken advantage of, that shit just happens. You guys saw Reginald Denny get fucking pulled out of a truck and get his face stomped in '92, right? And he had, for nothing, just for nothing. Right? And they were celebrating, stomping that dude's face in, And nobody did a fucking thing. Nobody did anything to save that guy. And like, I think look, the taxpayers invested a tremendous amount of money into me, and I don't feel like my mission to like help and give back ends because I took off my uniform. Anthony Spofford and Jarhead talked like, a man goes to war and you learn the rifle, and then you come home and you build a house and you might hold your wife and you might hold your newborn baby, but your hands can never forget the rifle. And like, that's the goddamn truth, And so it's not like I'm preparing just to like take care of myself. It's like I intend to be a fucking guardian for the people who would be victimized. I can tell you that Reginald Denny would never happen on my fucking corner. You know what I mean?
And that's a part of your bag too. When you're shooting, you were telling me that the reason that you have doubles of everything is that when you meet somebody, they can be either enemy or they can be a friend. And
now
so
I can force multiply. I can say, I trust you, here's a fucking gun to watch my back.
So it's not always about being just prepared for yourself, but it's about being prepared for others as well, not being the weak link in your community and
being an asset.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to talk about our respective shoots with Max. Because like I'm really interested in this idea that if you've been trained to this level of preparing and responding, you can't just unlearn that. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like the muscle memory and the accuracy was obvious like when we were shooting because you did a field strip on an AR-15. Like it's like it's going to be with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Like
I do that better than picking my nose.
There you go.
I don't know about that. I want to move on to asking a question about generational things, because one of the questions that, one of the issues in putting together this show was kind of being a lot of the discussion between myself and Ichiro was where are we going to look, what are we going to focus on, and the Wolberger sculpture here of the soldier, it was essentially a starting point for a lot of our thoughts about the exhibition, because as a boy I played with toy guns, you played soldiers, you ran around shooting each other, you dived, and who did the best dying, and those kind of games. And and I was thinking about how there's a generational difference, because you don't see kids running around with guns, toy guns, playing those games anymore, but they have video games, which maybe train them for drone strikes, or whatever it might be. And the question that I'm going to ask is, do you think maybe the generational differences are actually any different? I mean, different toys, but is it any different in terms of affecting the mindset of the culture towards being ready and complicit with warfare?
Well, our armed forces have had a big part in a lot of the video games that kids play. Call of Duty, they were involved in creating, and my brother was a military career. He was a tank commander, and I talked to him about it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, video games were great because when I'm in the tank, it's like playing a video game. So there's this kind of separation of warrior against warrior. We don't, even though that I'm sure happens, and it's going to come down to that. And obviously, it's going to come down to human against human. But it becomes this I don't know. It's kind of separation.
So can you guys hear about?
I should.
So you need to speak up, or take the mic.
The grey one.
The grey one. I'll just speak out. I have a teacher voice, so I can project. There it is.
Wow.
Sorry. I get comfortable and I'm like in this conversation where we're all like right here, like we're on the couch. But so I think going back to the games of preparing our boys for war, and it is play, but it is preparation, and that it desensitizes to a point, I believe. That's my own personal opinion.
Yes.
I don't know how to add to this, because I feel like I have a 7-year-old son, and I have a wife who's really anti-gun in the house. So I'm just going to keep it really personal here, because I feel like it's a case-to-case individual relationship to the issue. And so here I am, everyone in my family has a gun license, and I trained briefly on a weapon when I was in Afghanistan, because they just wanted to make sure that I knew how to operate all the machinery that they were using, and I in turn handed the soldiers my equipment so that they could see what I was using, and we had a kind of equipment sort of exchange in a way. So, but with my son, my wife doesn't want him to have any kind of toy guns, and I thought that was really tough, because I had cap guns as a kid, and I love these Nerf guns, these ones, but I have to, I also see the advantage of not having guns in the house, or toy guns, because then I also understand that there is a kind of very tight kind of triangulation between a tool, a weapon, and a kind of a toy, really. That relationship between the toy, the tool, and the weapon can be very blurred, and I think that's interesting. And really, we're not really sure what is the first extension, utility prosthetic of a human being. Was it a weapon or a tool or both? It can be an ambigram in both. The weapon is a tool of sorts, and so it's a really complex discussion that's taking place within my house, because I also like playing PlayStation 4, and Battlefront 2 is fantastic, and Black Ops is great, and I like Modern Warfare, and so I take it upon myself to investigate these digital spaces, and they're really interesting spaces, but they're also very powerful simulators for the war experience. But then as you would know, man, there's this huge leap between the simulator and the experience, and I think that the discussions around this idea of the simulator begetting actual real-world violence can only be supported if people who have actually had an experience of warfare to back that up. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like there is a massive gap, or there's a huge there's a leap between what happens in Call of Duty on a screen in 2D representational space, and what happens in the field.
The leap is pain.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a completely painless, air-conditioned experience where you're sitting on your fucking couch. Right? There's when you die, you just respawn.
Yeah. Well,
right?
the pain is having to
if you had to hump the actual 80 pounds of fucking gear that your little character is playing, you'd have bulging fucking discs and blown out fucking knees. Like like that's before people actually start shooting at you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the disconnect, the thing that people aren't aware of when they're playing that game, is the pain. You know, you were talking about toy guns and like the play of warfare, and like when I was a kid, my mother's raised me as a complete hippie. My mother and father were very much hippies, and I was disallowed to have guns, and I was disallowed to have GI Joes. So I would go into the woods and I would make guns out of sticks, and I would shoplift GI Joes and stuff them in my underwear. And so like I think that, I don't know, maybe it's past life expression, I don't know, but I was always sort of drawn to that. And I had a lot of conversation with my late mother about like, very much in line with some of the things that you were talking about, you know. And I remember telling her the pacifist line, right? You're just a victim who had a long streak of being protected by other people who are willing to be violent for you. And something that sort of came up for me was I told my mom, I said, if you expect to be a leader, and a leader for peace, how are those hawks going to ever listen to you if you didn't actually go do the thing? You know what I mean? Like, right-wingers who are like pro-war aren't going to listen to a hippie who's never been to war. They just won't. They'll dismiss them as a fucking hippie. And I'll preach this love thing, and people will mistake me and like, oh, you're just a fucking hippie. Motherfucker, I've been to war 6 times. I know what I'm talking about. And I think that like, the biggest peaceniks really are the combat veterans. And I think that like, those people who've like, seen their brothers, get blown up or killed in war, or come home and just go mad and blow their fucking brains out in the garage. Like, those guys are really those are the hippies who actually have skin in the game. Those are the hippies who really fucking mean it when they want peace. And I think that like, I felt like it was important for me to come here today and really share this experience with you. And I think that like, I don't get to really be a credible hippie if I don't have that credibility of experience. You know what I mean? And so like, I think it's part of your civic duty, or at least it feels like it to me, is to try to be a leader for peace. You don't get to really have a voice if you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And so like, yeah, I don't know.
The argument against that, of course, is you don't have to serial killer. You don't have to be a serial killer to try and stop serial killing.
No, I get that, but this isn't quite the same thing. We're not talking about madness and serial killing. We're talking about the political like means of violence for political ends as we have war, and people who don't have that experience. Unfortunately, like, they're super easy to dismiss.
Okay, so this leads us to the next question, which goes back to the exhibition and so on. What part can art play in influencing the cultural paradigms that allow the culture to be prepped for warfare in whatever ways? Like, what does it matter that somebody's making smart, an exhibition is put together, and how, if it does, what does it change? I was building towards this.
Give us the answer, guys.
Well, I guess for me, like, I guess there's this kind of romance around the fact that art has like some sort of immediate function and like immediate like flow-on effect, and that I guess I'm sort of a romantic in that sense. Like, I would like to think that art communicates experience that people might not see packaged as ideas in Hollywood or other mediums. That what's happening in these rooms can be like more critical or subtle or take different angles. Like we were saying before, Max, it doesn't have to go for the actual vainglorious sort of moment, or the kind of stuff that we would normally see in the heightened moment of violent warfare, but these other wild, subtle, complex kind of things, like even the prep or the aftermath or whatever, that can kind of get processed in this weird space called art for me. But then I think that like I'm interested in these ideas of like a kind of othering or us versus them. For me, all of these things that I came to the experience with on board kind of dissolved when I started talking to soldiers. Because like even respect for the enemy that Max was talking about, I mean that was so deep with Special Operations Task Group. Like when they were going out and confiscating weapons, and I'm using that term, however you think they're going to confiscate weapons of the belligerents, yeah? Like they're going to talk to them and confiscate their weapons off them after a heated discussion, whatever. Horrible things happen. And they take the weapons back and they realize that their adversaries weren't actually using Russian-built Kalashnikovs, but they were Chinese replicas of AK-47s. And yet these guys had this advanced, system running after them. And these guys were in southern Afghanistan with these weapons and very little else except for their cunning and their local knowledge and a history of warfare like that was centuries old. And that these warriors who were from ISAF respected the fact that that it was asymmetrical and that their opponents were incredible to the point where they were seriously threatened and they were kind of bewildered as to how they were still having to work so hard and fear for their lives being in that situation, even though they had the most advanced technology.
I got goosebumps just thinking about the Afghans. Like when you say Afghan or Afghanistan, you're saying the unconquerable that's what it translates to. And I had this experience in Afghanistan where like they are the hardest fucking people on the planet. Like I saw a little girl in the back of the truck. Her dad was driving. And there's a millstone, a literal fucking millstone that tipped and landed on her little legs. That girl didn't fucking cry a bit. She just like started screaming at her dad in Pashto, and like 3 guys came and lifted the stone off, and like her ankle was all swollen up. She didn't cry at all. I saw a dude like walking for miles in the wintertime, and I had a parka on, and he's just searching for firewood, and he doesn't even have shoes. Like the hardest people you've ever met in the world. And they have this thing where like it's a fucking haunted country. I'm a pretty science-based kind of dude, but it's trippy. There's like places that are just weird dead zones. You've heard about this, right? And they'll talk about how like if you dig under the ground, you'll find Russians. You know what you'll find after that? You'll find Alexander the Great's people. You'll find the British. People have been coming here for fucking centuries and just fighting over the spice road or controlling oil areas. Like we want it now because it's a strategic spot for us to use as an air launching campaign into the Middle East. But like, I mean, there is a tremendous amount of love and respect that you have for a guy. I mean, like, I'm getting 3,000 calories of fucking protein. I'm getting brand new gun oil for a brand new gun and night vision goggles so I can see in the dark. You know what I mean? And like, these guys are just doing it on tea and a little blip of opium. And
I'm sorry, I'm going to drag this back because the question was how does art affect things? Do we have any of this? Let's just go back on topic. Allison?
Okay. Well, I mean, art is an expression of our human experience, and when our human experience is dominated by warfare and the news of warfare, and we live in a world now where we do know what's going on in other parts of the country. Of course, not every or conflict is being reported or being reported in the same way, still we have a lot more ability to think about that and to understand or try to understand it. And what art does is that it creates dialogue, and I think that we need to have that space for dialogue, and that this type of political art kind of pops up at different times throughout, and I think it's because of that we as humans have a need to discuss it.
So what does that say about the best kinds of art for engaging with a culture, with people? Is there a kind?
I think that changes. I mean, it's because language changes, we change, so it's.
I think it's incredibly important. I think it's incredibly impactful. When you ask that question, like a flash came to my head was that self-immolating monk from Vietnam. And like I think that like those kinds of images are worth 1,000 fucking bullshit speeches. I think that the work that you did as an embedded, I think that like the images that you're creating, talking about like basically our preparation for our worst nightmares. I think that like personally, I think that the art is very important, and I think it definitely has that back. I think if you like without that, I think that. Jason Ramos he said to me once, he said, art is the sublimation of survival, And like, once the fucking cave bears held at bay, the first thing they start doing is painting on the cave walls. Once there's enough food that you have the time to paint, they start painting, right? And so I think that like, I think that the art is incredibly important for making a difference. And I think, without it, like, it's a lot more easy for us to just sort of blunder forward in history with a bunch of more violence and not even have the discussion that like we can do better.
We have that thing where, as somebody who works professionally in the arts, we get a little bit backslapping for ourselves, and of course we affect the world, and everything matters because it matters to us. But there are enough times when I'm doing studio visits or going to exhibitions where I remain pessimistic about it, or at least unconvinced at best. With current, we actually put out a call on Facebook, just a question saying, what can the institution do to become actively involved in some kind of political role? What would be appropriate? And most of the replies that we got were basically for the museum to step aside and let people come in and do a sit or do activism without recognising without in any way denigrating the kind of the value of activism. It distanced any real point of the institution. We're here to show art. So how can we show art that might be helpful? Not how do we stop being who we are, because somehow that a bunch of people protesting in the museum is going to be more effective. I can't see how it is effective, and I find the same question towards like what are some of these artworks, particularly those works that are more activist based, rather than these kind of things which I think can ask questions that allow the viewer to start a dialogue, whereas a lot of activist art is very didactic. This is wrong, okay, you're right, no conversation. And so when I asked that following question is, what kind of art is the most effective in engaging in a dialogue when so much activist art is just really bad art?
I think sometimes activism can be art without even them intending it to be. The example that comes to mind first, I love these videos I've seen of black kids in the ghetto just destroying cops with water guns. Have you guys seen these?
No.
Oh my god, it's the best. Imagine like a crowd of no less than 20 or 30 kids who are just tired of militarized cops in their neighborhood, and they just ambush them with super soakers and just spray the fucking. It is fucking amazing. And like I talk about like art and play as a way of civil disobedience and fighting back and just taking those motherfuckers' egos down 10 pegs. And like you have all these hawks who are like, this is wrong, those people need to go to jail. Like, you guys, they shot a war pistol, like, it's the funniest shit I've ever seen.
So maybe the value in some ways is to undermine authority rather than what one might hope for being more concrete goals. It's more a resistance to authoritarian
undermine or bring them back to being human.
Yeah.
Those dudes, like those guys who are patrolling Main Street are being trained like they're going to go to Fallujah, because of this failed stupid ass drug war, right? And this hyper preparation for all that. And I think that like they get into that RoboCop mindset, and it's bad for them. It's bad for those officers as public servants.
It's bad for the community.
It's bad for the community, obviously, right? And so what I love is that like they're undermining that person by taking away just enough of their ego to remind them that they're just another person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting like that it can happen through that kind of play. Like I remember this video of these street skateboarders who were getting hassled out by their local police force, and they just turned up to the same spot but all wearing police uniforms. The skateboarders, and that was really great because it was like undermining, but not being offensive or directly hurting. It was just enough to just like disrupt the.
To make fun of them.
Yeah.
Make fun of them.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a weapon.
Yeah.
Humor. It's love, right? Humor is love, right?
Yeah.
You're just fighting back against violence with love by taking the piss out of somebody.
It's always good to have a lot more kids than officers. It's good to be outnumbered and be a bit, or have the greater numbers. But I was thinking like there's probably no measure to like how effective any one particular artwork is in trying to change or transform. It's just like too complex, and it's like almost individual to individual, case by case, this stuff. But I do think that Kit's example before of Steve McQueen's project, was so amazing for the art community to have to recognise that Royal Mail couldn't even produce the stamps because it would have changed public opinion, and there would have been a huge outcry. That, for me, the fact that project failed in becoming a stamp set was its power. It was almost like Steve just hit the nerve and the state just freaked out and went, we can't show these guys' faces because people will be licking the backs of the dead and putting their mail through a mail system and having to think it was just too hot to handle.
We actually tried to get that here, but we couldn't afford the shipping.
Yeah, see, if you ask Steve, he probably, it was, you know what I mean? Like he'd probably say, hell yeah, let's get it going on here. But that's the problem with the art world, is it's probably become too much of a commodity luxury market.
Okay, which leads on for my last question before general questions and we finish. So what would be the hopeful end of a visitor's takeaway from this kind of exhibition? I mean, what would you hope for? I mean, you made art which has bearing in this exhibition, and you made it for a reason, and it's up for people to engage with. So what do you think? What would be the best takeaways?
Professionally, I can't talk about it because I feel like I have to privilege someone's intention, my interpretation over my intention. So my intention could be that I want people to be absolutely devastated, that they won't know the issue anymore, even though they came in thinking that they were all over it, and they have to kind of have a 3-year rethink after this exhibition. That'd be my grandiose intentions as an artist. But I think that interpretation is just so open. I can't be prescriptive about it. I'd hope that people like the work, in the first instance, but then the idea of people actually having to rethink, form opinions that they were cultivating because of an art experience, that's a huge thing to ask people to do. It's almost like the romance around Guernica, when a German officer comes into Picasso's studio and says, who did that? And Picasso says, you did it. That's it's almost like the narrative around that dialogue, whether it's true or not, became just as powerful as Guernica. But then the art world, being a kind of luxury goods market, sort of fucks it, ruins it in the end, because I think T.J. Clark said that Guernica is worth more now than the entire real estate of the town of Guernica. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just weird. Like, it was, you know, it was produced as a protest, and then there's this kind of romance around it. But I love the idea that the conversation in the studio, for me, is as powerful as the work. That little bit of dialogue, that's like, wow, you know, it's a clever quip, but it's kind of interesting for the artist to kind of remove themselves and say that the world made the work. You know, and just being really romantic with others.
Yeah, I think Shaun said it very well. But just that people go away and talk about it. That art inspires some sort of either interior dialogue or dialogue within a family or a community, and that's taken, and so it gives life to that conversation beyond the white walls.
Sure.
I went to Sarajevo and saw like the war museum there and all the bullets and the holes in the buildings and stuff. It's fortunate that we have such great neighbors to our north and south. It's fortunate, like, I don't know if you guys know this, but like black slaves who were freed could run to Mexico, and if they made it across the border, they were free people. And the American government petitioned the Mexican government to like, hey, will you return these slaves? That's not cool. And the Mexicans were like, fuck you, no. Once they're here, they're free, motherfucker. And like, that was it. So like, it's not just where you're at in the world geographically, it's also like, who are those people on your border? And yeah, the Russians hosing those Ukrainians. Those Ukrainians are in the streets with broomsticks and like, you know, baking sheets for shields because they don't have weapons. Like, it's. I remember reading that like, after the Japanese destroyed the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, the generals after the war asked the Japanese, why didn't you invade California? And they were like, we had people who were reporting back to us how many hunting licenses you guys had applied for. And we knew that you had more guns than we had soldiers to send. And I think that like, that's that self-reliance I'm talking about, you know? Like, it's on you to learn how to write and read, and it's on you to learn how to run a drill and a hammer, and it's on you to learn how to run a gun. You know, these are just, we can't divorce ourselves from the power that these tools have and just sit in feckless sort of, you know, inefficiency. You've got to learn.
If you accept that the geographical limitations have something to do with this, then I would suggest that old thing about follow the money is where to go, because if you follow the money and the amount of money that the American government invests in the military, which is what I think more money than the entire 8 next nations on the planet for a war that will probably never be on American soil. I mean, that's very, very super unlikely to happen. And that being the case, then the extension of power elsewhere has got to, mostly it seems to me, has to be economic. Because you're invading countries that are not any threat to your gut, and the idea is that you're somehow policing the world. Well, that's blatantly not true when you look at the countries that have had democratically elected governments overthrown by American influence and money. I mean, nothing seems to me to talk about that mentality of readiness more than it does a deliberately perpetuated governmental and military industrial complex idea to make sure that the population is willing to give that money. And you just said thank you for your service. I'm from a military family. I was born on a base. I have a brother in the military, and I think it's crap. And we're best friends, and I still think this is crap. Because this whole idea, thank you for service, what service are you thanking for? If you're in Europe, it's a completely different situation, because you have neighbours that historically there's been warfare for centuries with, and movements of peoples, borders. The whole of Europe has functioned that way, and Asia. in the past. I understand it, but that doesn't explain the Americans' problems with it. And the only way to trace it here, because there's nobody coming in and invading, in fact, it's Americans that have done the opposite.
Well, they're not invading because of that. The service that you're providing is that, like, you will deploy and bring the fight to them before they're able to bring it to you.
Yeah, because you know what, they are lining up in Afghanistan to get on the bomber planes, they come over to America and jump out.
Totally agree. It's totally agree. It's always follow the money. You guys know the nurse in Azzarella story, right? You guys know that? You guys know this one? Okay, so like when we went into Kuwait, the Kuwaitis and the Iraqis were at odds with each other because oil and pipeline, and Saddam wanted to start trading oil in dinars. The American government said, fuck that, we trade oil in fucking dollars and dollars only. And he said, no thanks, that's not how I'm gonna run it. And he had a pipeline moving through Kuwait. And the Kuwaitis wanted to renege on their deal with the pipeline. The American public didn't want to, this is in 92, 93, right before the first Gulf War. And there was a woman who came on TV, and I remember watching this with my dad at the time. And they called her Nurse Nazariya, or Nurse Nazariya. And she was under the employ of a PR firm in New York City called Hill & Knowlton. And they fabricated a fucking lie. And they told us on national television, she got up there and cried, this nurse, this young Kuwaiti nurse, got up and cried about Iraqi soldiers in the streets of Kuwait who had been pulling babies out of incubators and killing them. That's what they said. That's what they said on television. It's a complete fabrication made up by Hill & Knowlton. Check them out. They're a publicly traded company, and they have been lying to you for fucking ever. Okay? And she told us a fucking lie. It turns out this woman was not a nurse, that there weren't babies being pulled out of incubators, that the American public was friends with Saddam 5 years before. He got some power and said, I want to swap oil in dinars, and we didn't want to do that. And so we generated this lie, and we got lied to. And that's what started to sway American opinion, was these war crimes being committed by the Iraqis. It didn't fucking happen. And so, like, yeah, it is crap. Both things are true.
Sure, if you go back in history and look at the Vietnam War, the same. Based on the big lies, right? And then in that process, then we killed 2 million, 5 million Vietnamese. And hey, we did it for freedom.
Right.
So they're always doing it for self-interest.
Yeah.
It's not that they're very concerned about Mexicans or the Salvadorans or Ukrainians. It's what's important. Always. And as Max was saying about the war industry, is the most profitable industry there is. So they will continue to promote, lie, and pretend that they'll help you to sell their goods.
Right. Well, that's to say that, like, all leadership, everywhere, always, is equal parts theater and fear. Always. It's not just us. We just happen to be the most powerful at it,
sure.
Right? But like, they were doing that in Rome since they've always been doing that. Everyone has always done that. Like, we are no better or worse than anybody in history who's had power and done this. Both things are true. The soldier can serve the public, and the government will manipulate the soldier.
Marianne?
I guess the thing that I've heard in this question is the question within the question, which is our freedom in America is predicated on this understanding that all the guns are pointed at each other. So if anybody shoots first, it's a death sentence for everybody in the circle. So our peace is predicated by this circle of violence, right? But at some point, think about that. The other stories we told each other, which is the narrative of the West. Right? At some point, people turned in their guns, or they had to get out of Dodge, right? We had characters that showed up as this liberal character in American history who defended democracy, defended freedom, with the idea that maybe the guns aren't making us safe, maybe I'll need to turn them in order to enter into civilized society, and we let go of that violent structure, okay? What's missing right now is we have no narrative of any kind of masculine man within patriarchy that's saying, we can turn in guns and we'll be safer together. There's no alternative. It's either you're defending, it's rugged individualist, my freedoms, with the guy that you're going to hand to me, you're a man, or nothing. And we have no other sort of alternative structure or story that we're telling each other. So that's the first thing that comes to mind when I'm in a show like this, is that there have been other war stories, right? There are other narratives, there are other narrative arcs other than the one that's being popularized today.
Right.
Right? Or the one that kids who are playing video games are hearing today. Because we don't have narrative stories and movies that are as powerful as they used to be as younger kids.
Right. So it's a problem with storytelling. Like my favorite gunslinger in history is Harriet Tubman. Right. That black woman is my favorite gunslinger of all time. Right. And her policy was, once you get on the road to freedom with me, there ain't no turning back. If you want to run back, I'll blow your brains out. You know. And anybody who comes and tries to put you back in a chain, I'll do the same to them. I think that like it's what you're talking about with Ukraine. Like if you don't have the means to fight back, that is a problem also. There is something about being sort of, I don't know, over-prepared, you know, or just sort of like this masturbation of ego with a fucking gun in your hand, you know? Like that is also a problem. But I think that I think the middle way is probably the correct way. That I don't think that in the midst of you know, the problems we have with victimization, that it's just a good idea to just completely disarm and just trust a government that has consistently fucked us over. Just that they're gonna fucking take care of it. They won't.
I like this middle way thing.
That is the middle way.
Yeah, a bit,
and I think I'll tell you this, when our government funds mental health, when our government gives us an education system that's on par with any of these disarmed European or Canadian countries, when our government opens up and dismantles private prisons and a drug war, then we can start to have a conversation about me trusting you enough to hand over my weapons. You know what I mean? Until then, what the fuck are you talking? No, I'm not giving up my weapons. You guys put us in the prisons for profit, gave us a bullshit drug war. If someone's legitimately crazy, they have to go to a Walmart and start stabbing and shooting people just to get fucking healthcare. You know what I mean? No. I think there is a middle path where you don't, and you're telling me that crazy people can't get medication, so they're shooting people. Mm-hmm. And so as a sane person, I should disarm myself instead of you funding cheap medication for people so they don't shoot people. It's ridiculous. This idea that I should be powerless, I should be more powerless than you've already made me. I don't agree.
Maybe we should have a unity that took care of each other.
What's that?
If you got a house and stuff in the neighborhood that's open on the street, I'll come visit you and not have a gun.
Or maybe the middle ground between a functioning weapon and no weapon is the water pistol. Maybe that's where we're going. I mean, but I also, I'm interested in this idea of storytelling. Can I just go back? Can I have a rave?
We're going to have to. And we've still got a question or two, so quick.
To do my turn.
No, man. I'll be quick. But I've got this story, but it's a little bit hubristic because I'm going to talk about my work, but it involves this guy, and this is one perception of the work that we made, and it's happened a few times. So I can kind of say that this was a profile, or this was a way of reading the work. People got out of the headset and went. How did you get access to that insurgent? How did you get access to someone who was an extremist who was obviously, bearded and ready to use that weapon, and that must have been terrifying being in that space. And I said, actually, that insurgent we think is in the virtual reality experience is actually someone who's had multiple deployments. Has a huge history of serving, has this professional engagement with war, and wasn't actually cooking up plastic explosives, but was making soap. And I give him the story.
He said soap. I'm not making syntax. That's actually making soap that I donate to the homeless. It's not plastic explosives I'm making in that video. So
it's like a complete inversion of they were thinking of complete threat, and that the cooking was an explosives kind of process, and I just love telling people that your biography and your actual and that's when I feel like my job is I'm kind of experiencing something that I might not have really even calculated in the work was just that the narrative was so misread, which is also valid, that the person reading insurgent extremist threat.
That tells you about the paranoia.
Paranoia.
Bring to it every day.
Yeah. And then
The inherent racism.
Yeah, profiling racism. Yeah, but then just pull the rug underneath. You know, that's I think art is great for just pulling that rug,
Totally.
and destabilizing
But
it.
it's also interesting that somebody would say insurgent as opposed to say right-wing crazy, which is
Well,
what the majority.
Wrong colour,
But you know, it has that sense that it's always jumping to the other and that paranoia about the other, as opposed to what most terrorists are, which are
Homegrown neighbors.
Yeah.
Have we got any last questions then, yours?
I was really quickly, just for Allison, with those works, are they part of series that you're not going to explore any further, or do you intend to take?
Oh no, I'm still working on that one. Yeah, that's an ongoing project, and so I'm photographing American monuments and relics, and of course the Confederate monuments are a huge part of that dialogue. And so I've been photographing the monuments that are still standing and the monuments that have been removed. You know, I think that as a white person, as white people, it's our responsibility to talk about white supremacy, and we need to find the language to do that. And so that's kind of, you know, that's my struggle as an artist and as a white girl from the South. It's like, how do we do this? But I'm willing to jump in and try. So I kind of still finding my way through it.
Okay, so it's an ongoing.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so
Can I just say something just generally to the comment? So this is the third one of these that we've done, and like I said, they've all been very different. But actually, I think this has been one of the most interesting sessions out of all three. Just simply because there's been like some really great and civil disagreement amongst the people on the panel. That, you know, I think it's really fantastic. This is exactly what we need. But I mean, this is the thing that's actually lacking from political discourse internationally within the United States.
Absolutely.
just before we finish, lunch is going to be outside for everyone. Help yourselves, and please join me in thanking these three for